and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I will be doing a review of Kelly Barnhill's When Women Were Dragons, a standalone fantasy novel I read last month. This is a fairly recent 2022 release, and I wanted to review it principally because it stands, in my opinion, as a genuine example of contemporary feminist SFF. Yay! It also, features the word dragon or dragons in its title, and more importantly, of course, features dragons in its story. So, yeah, need I really say more here? When Women Were Dragons is what I would call light, domestic fantasy that features a version of reality where women are capable of dragoning, i.e. transforming into literal dragons, and where this phenomenon has consistently been bound up in shame and or secrecy throughout history. The narrative specifically is written as and unfolds through the memoirs of its female protagonist, Alex. It largely takes place in the United States of America in the 1950s, around an event called the mass dragoning, which the US government subsequently tries to cover up, and centers on Alex's experience with and observations of dragoning, yes, but also female identity, relationships, shame, and gradual societal change. Since it is written as the memoirs of its female protagonist, like I just said, When Women Were Dragons is a single point of view story told in first person. Structurally, the story alternates between chapters set during Alex's child and teenage years that center on her experience of life, relationships, and dragoning as a phenomenon in the 1950s and 60s, and interim chapters, if you will, during which Alex either takes a moment to reflect on her experiences with the added benefit of hindsight, or presents various documents, bits of research, etc. about dragoning, both through the lens of history and folklore a little bit, and that of the natural sciences, biology and medicine principally. I personally really enjoyed this dual structure as it allowed for different parts of the story to focus on different aspects of character work and theming in a way that felt very pleasantly balanced overall. Prose-wise, I would say the author skillfully mixed a more straightforward or utilitarian style of narrative delivery with draconic flights of expressive elegance when it came to describing Alex's inner emotional life or illustrating passages linked to dragoning and its metaphorical ramifications in terms of theming. A specific example that comes to mind with regards to the latter is that of a prom night scene during which Alex observes a group of female schoolmates dancing together, then slowly transforming into dragons as a group. It was such a beautifully written, powerful, and just wonderfully scintillating scene. On the whole, I feel very satisfied with When Women Were Dragons' character work. The fact it is told as its protagonist's memoirs certainly helps, since this structural choice de facto gives the reader intimate access to Alex as a fully fleshed out character, whom I was personally decently, able to relate to as a fellow introverted female nerd of sorts. Additionally, this novel features, I'd say, good homosexual representation, as both Alex and her aunt are lesbians. Beyond that, I principally enjoyed the book's character work because of the way it synergized with its theming on interdependence, female relationships, and familial legacy, which I'll get back to in a few minutes. Alex shares her life experiences with the reader, which allows you to know her as a person, like I said, but also talks about and tries to make sense of her relationships with primarily other women, her aunt and mother chief among them. Taken all together, this allows the reader to engage very directly with the story's theming, which is a plus in my book, and I think the resulting dynamic interplay between character growth, both literal and metaphorical, character interactions, and thematic delivery gives this novel a very pleasant flavor of quiet strength and emotional impact. So I called When Women Were Dragons light domestic fantasy. You could alternatively call it realistic fantasy because it kind of functions a bit like magical realism. That being said, I'd argue this novel is more committed to its not insignificant central fantasy element and its nature than the rather wishy-washy genre of magical realism, which I've come to learn I really do not like. So realist fantasy it is. Indeed, outside of the fact women can dragon, not, once again, that that element is insignificant by any means, mind you, the story's world is essentially our own. As such, there really isn't much to say here in terms of world building stricto sensu. Still, what I can say is that no, you will not get any sort of hard explanation as to how dragoning actually works on a biological level. Dragoning primarily functions as a fully developed, embodied metaphor, if you will. That's the kind of parallel to magical realism. Though interestingly enough, the story does show scientists trying to understand the phenomenon of dragoning through the means of empirical research out of a desire to further the knowledge of humankind, certainly, but also to give it, and the women who experience it, legitimacy born out of compassion, is what I'm going to call it. But none of this is done to give you world-building answers. Rather, it is done to prop up subtler theming, that was very nicely done, but I'll get back to it, on the pursuit of knowledge, societal change, and resistance to said change, especially on an institutional level. Either way, I certainly appreciated the little bits of dragon and/or feminist-adjacent lore that popped up in some of the book's interim chapters. So the chapters where adult Alex shares research or legends about dragoning and reflects back on her experiences. On a slightly more negative note, however, and without really spoiling too much of anything, When Women Were Dragons also shows, though, dragons, who used to be women, wear lipstick or carry handbags at times, in addition to performing domestic tasks. This bothered me a smidge for theming reasons, I'll get shortly, but it really bugged me from a dragon enthusiast and very good visualizer perspective. Because no, I'm sorry, I can't take a dragon wearing lipstick seriously. Unless we're talking absurdist fancy, I guess. But otherwise, no. My brain will not do it. Sorry. But now, let's move on to what I'm most enthusiastic about when it comes to this novel. It's theming! Because, lo and behold, and as already stated in my introduction, I have finally come across genuine, contemporary, feminist SFF. Huzzah! Indeed, When Women Were Dragons, as domestic fantasy, features feminist theming centered on, well, the generally silent, everyday sex-based oppression experienced by women socialized through gender into domestic, well, general submission. And the painful shame, if not rage, this has led, and often still does lead to varying extents in varying ways across time and culture, of course. And to be clear, I include both physical violence and the psychological violence of stifling a person's selfhood or self-actualization within this, let's be real, too gentle label of domestic submission. This admittedly big theme is developed to a satisfying degree through Alex's experiences as a lesbian, mathematically gifted, and introverted girl growing up in the 1950s, and through the observations she makes of her aunt and mother and others in relation to the mass dragoning as well. Observations she doesn't fully understand as a child, and, well, only start to make sense as she grows into a young woman. Dragoning, in effect, largely, though not exclusively, serves as a metaphor for pain, festered into rage, despair, that can no longer be silenced and contained within oneself. There is, without a doubt, something truly glorious about the way a lot of the dragonings are described in the novel, and more specifically, something very poignant about the way the feeling of smallness caused by both societal and self-repression is used to magnify the significance of dragoning, of transforming into a huge, fierce, but magnificently free beast of legend. I felt that. The central conceptual motif also reminded me of, you'll have to see it, Ursula K. Le Guin's Tehanu a little, as both novels use similar imagery to symbolically illustrate shared themes of empowered, or I prefer the term actualized, female selfhood. Though I think it is more purposefully and specifically utilized in When Women Were Dragons. Either way, this little parallel, if you will, added a nice little bookish cherry to my reading experience. Shame, silence, and transformative anger are also tied into broader theming on social justice, inequality, certainly, especially as Alex's story moves into the 1960s. But then all of that additionally seeks into surprisingly good commentary I did not expect on the ways oppression, discrimination, stereotyping, and the bias those things inevitably lead to impact the acquisition and transmission of empirical knowledge, especially as it applies to the life sciences, and more specifically than that, biology and or medicine. You can easily read commentary on McCarthyism and other such historical events into the story as well, as propaganda and other apparatuses of state control, or rather repression, are deployed to prevent people, women especially, of course, in this case, from acknowledging, discussing, understanding, and maybe choosing dragons and dragoning, because we all know stuff just goes away when you pretend it doesn't exist, right? In any case, and to reiterate, I was happily surprised by this secondary theme, and by how beautifully expressed it was at times in the narrative. Finally, When Women Were Dragons features quieter theming on interrelatedness, interconnectedness, especially as expressed through, principally female, once again, familial ties, and familial legacy or trauma. Alex reflects a lot on her relationship with her aunt, her mother, her younger sister, etc., and I found the way she articulated her complicated feelings towards them quite moving overall, and that's also something I didn't really expect, I guess. Additionally, and this is a very small thing, I know, but I like these kinds of small details, there's a secondary knot motif, kind of tied into mathematics a bit, running through the novel as well, and I thought it's echoed here on a more aesthetic level, I guess, the theming on interrelatedness, interconnectedness, you know, all this knotting very nicely. The only significant complaint I have when it comes to When Women Were Dragons narrative and thematic developments is that I was a little disappointed it didn't commit more deeply to female rage and wildness, for lack of a better term, without, once again, spoiling too much of anything plot-wise. So the vast majority of the women who dragon in the story during the mass dragoning of the 1950s leave their families without a trace, and this is understandably very traumatic for a lot of the people left behind. However, after some years have passed, a decent number of dragon women actually start returning to their families, but, and this is what bugged me, with little actual observable or directly observable change to the status quo of their prior, on the whole, dysfunctional familial dynamics. Though I suppose, in all fairness, you could assume they would be less easily oppressed or abused, etc., as giant fire-breathing beasts. So fair enough. And don't get me wrong, I understand some of that just illustrates the fact women are interconnected human beings, just like everyone else. Because we are human beings, first and foremost. And most of us do want to care for those we love and be part of their lives. So I get that. But part of the problem of women's oppression is precisely that our human capacity for empathy nurtured on average in girls and women to greater extents than it is in boys and men. This is feminist theory 101 stuff I can't delve more deeply into here. Our very capacity for loving and caring about others too often before our own selves has been historically weaponized against us. So yeah, women erupting in full draconic glory only to go back to wearing kitchen aprons and lipstick as dragons. Thus felt like a massive letdown. Well, maybe not massive, but it was a letdown. The author absolutely had the right to make that narrative choice, and to be clear, I don't think it's intrinsically good or bad. I just would have preferred something with even more, well, draconic bite. But either way, yes, I would definitely recommend this novel, if only because it's an actual example of, in my book, good to very good, I gave it a 7.5 out of 10 rating, contemporary feminist SFF. Something which I've honestly struggled to find, so huzzah once again. Have I seen better? Oh yes, definitely. The best feminist SFF I've read firmly remains written before the 2010s, at most recent, I think. But this, at least, is something. It's a good something too, and it's a something with dragons. That gets an automatic point out of me in any case, but with this specific novel, I'll add that I also just really dug seeing the Western, at any rate, archetypal relationship between the female, nature, and great serpents, or well, dragons, brought to glorious life and loving light this way. Finally, a quick little addendum before I wrap it all up. In October, I also read Alex E. Harrow's The Once and Future Witches, right after I finished When Women Were Dragons, and found it to be another example of decent to good, this time, contemporary feminist SFF. I really vibed with its witchcraft-related aesthetics and symbolism, and actually prefer the aforementioned bite Harrow's novel displayed with regards to its theming on the painful emotions that arise in response to repression and injustice. Although in this case, it was a witchy rather than a draconic bite. Overall, however, I did prefer When Women Were Dragons, principally because I found it more genuinely moving and eloquent with its imagery. Still, given the feminist theming in both of these novels is pretty similar, you may want to consider pairing them up. All the more so if, like me, you love all or most things witchcraft and dragon related. That will be all for this review of Kelly Barnhill's When Women Were Dragons. I hope you found it interesting, informative, engaging, all those good things. But on that final note, I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all again reasonably soon, I swear, in another video. But until then, bye-bye.